Welcome back to HSC AMA, Real World Answers from Real World Practitioners. Going to be more excited to feature Jed Mahrle, the founder of Practical Prospecting. And obviously, today's session is going to be focused only on practical prospecting, strategies, tactics, all things sales. Welcome to the show, Jed.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Julia. Excited to be here.
So, yeah, you need no introductions. It's a rare case.
I, I guess not. No, your introduction was fine. Yeah. I can give one if you want, but I think we're good.
Cool. So, let's just get into it. The first question, to all you joining, just a little context. If we have some new folks here, the questions are all submitted by the community. So I'm going to be just reading them and probably asking Jed additional questions here and there. But I will try my best to address all of them. So, question number one: how do you challenge a challenger?
Oh, how do you challenge a challenger? Like, as in, I need more context to that. Is that like your coach, like the person you're working with?
I don't know. I think they meant like basically somebody who's using a challenger methodology.
How do you challenge it? I see what you're saying. Okay, I was confused by the method. And is this from the perspective of the person who's selling and their prospect is using a challenger? Or maybe they're just being, I want to answer the question in the way that I think I understand it, which is like maybe a more so of like a challenging prospect or somebody who's kind of challenging what you're saying. And whoever asked this, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and clarify your question if I didn't fully understand it. If the question is phrased as how do you challenge a prospect that is, being particularly challenging or pushing back on you, whether that be a cold call or a demo, my biggest thing is to strip line and like pull back, right? If somebody is pushing against you or not necessarily going with your flow, maybe they want to see the demo right away and they're not answering your discovery questions, pull back, strip line, and say, hey, it sounds like, sounds like maybe this isn't exactly a fit, or it sounds like maybe you're in a hurry, or essentially just like label, as Chris Voss talks about it, what you think you're understanding. And that's like been the biggest key for me in sales is like the best thing to do is to just call a spade and call out the things that you're hearing. And oftentimes that will get the other person to respect you a little bit more and open up about, what's really on their mind. Because that's the biggest thing about sales is like trying to get your prospect to actually speak what's truthfully on their mind, as opposed to, not necessarily telling the truth or sticking to their agenda.
Do you even think about methodologies when you sell?
Honestly, no, I've never been. This might be a hot take. I've never been like a huge methodology person. I've studied a lot of them. I've read the books. I've done like formal trainings and courses, and I've been in management positions where we have to learn them. And of course, if I'm managing a team, like I want to stick to a certain methodology. But I have found that sometimes it's a bit too rigid, and I like to pull out pieces of different methodologies and do what works well for me. So like when I've led sales teams, we typically have like a standard methodology we follow, but sometimes people are just more comfortable following different methodologies. So I ask them to first practice and master the methodology that we want to lead with. And then once they've started to show results and progress with that methodology, insert different ideas or methodologies into your process and feel free to mix it up and get creative, because I think it just kind of depends on the person.
What is the foundation that they almost always kind of enforced on you? Was it Sandler or?
It was Sandler for the most part, especially at PandaDoc, and then we started shifting towards Medic or MedPick, as they call it, a little bit more because we were going a little bit more up market enterprise accounts, and that kind of aligned a bit more with those. But those are the two primary kind of methodologies that I've followed.
Cool. Next question. How do I know I have message market fit?
Oh, that's a good question. So I'll take it from the perspective of like prospecting and outreach, and particularly email. I'd say it really depends on a few key metrics. So I've determined, for the most part, when I'm sending out cold emails, I'm trying to find message market fit. The key metric I'm looking for is booking rate. So booking rate is like, let's say I emailed 100 prospects and I booked one meeting. That's a 1% booking rate. Now, in my opinion, anywhere from like a 0.5 to 3% booking rate. So you're booking one meeting per 200 people you reach out to, or three meetings per 100 on the high end for 3%. That's a really good booking rate. And that tells me that I've found a message that's landing, right? I have some level of message market fit. Now, the key there is to start scaling that number up. Don't just reach out to 100 prospects. Now try it on 1,000, right? Pull a bigger list, do a bigger target account list. And if that booking rate still holds within that 0.5 to 3% rate, then you know you're starting to find message market fit. But what often happens is people will scale that volume up and realize that their booking rate fell quite a bit, and they have to rework it. So I would say you're not necessarily at message market fit until you've done it with scale and you're still in a healthy booking rate. Otherwise, you're going to be burning through accounts to hit your targets, and essentially that's burning through your TAM.
You post a lot lately, like different systems for not only prospecting, but every micro scale within the prospecting realm. I'm curious, do you think in systems, or like how do you think about it?
Yeah, I definitely think in systems. It's like early on in my SDR career, I started documenting the things I was doing through my newsletter, and that evolved into like my own personal document of like systems and playbooks and things that have worked well for me. And I think sales and particularly prospecting, it's much more scientific than maybe people think it is, in my opinion. I know there's an art to it, but that's the interesting thing about sales and outbound in general, is that it is like relatively scientific. There are systems you can follow, there are tactics you can use that work over and over again. And so I like to save all those things and have a system for how I write a first email, how I write a follow-up email, how I write a sequence, how I research, how I prospect. And I just save these over and over. It's like my own personal document. I grab new ideas from different people. I'll try it out. If it works, I add it to my own personal playbook. And what you've seen through these videos is me just kind of going into my playbook and recording videos of little snippets of each one. But I do think in systems, because there's just so much that goes into sales. There's so much effort you have to put in, especially right now in like the economic environment we're in right now. And so having systems like this where I don't have to think as much allows me to focus a little bit more on creative activities that lead to more revenue.
Do you begin with a system, or you document it after?
I think it depends on the scenario. Like for the most part, I begin with the system. Like for example, if I'm working, excuse me, if I'm working with I do a lot of like fractional consulting work. If I'm working with a new startup, I have a pretty general understanding of like these are the 5 steps you need to follow to get you to set up a successful outbound motion. And so I will always start with my system. Not every system is going to work every time, and so you have to like be open to being creative and trying new solutions. But for the most part, that system like gets me 80% of the way there, and then it's just the creativity and critical thinking that helps me kind of fill in that last 20%. But yeah, I always start with the system. If I'm charting into new territories in a realm that I haven't done before when it comes to outbound or sales, then I obviously don't have a system to start with, so I have to figure something out. But yeah, absolutely.
Next question, how do you balance quality of outreach with volume?
Yeah, that's such a timeless question. I feel like we'll always be asking that question. How do I balance quality with volume? I always recommend. So the interesting thing about like where we're at now in 2024 is that you can automate just about everything, like personalizing emails. I think the only thing you can't automate is actual cold calls, but you can automate just about everything. But what I always like to do is start doing things completely manual. So like research my accounts completely manual, build lists completely manual, send emails completely manual, no sequences, things of that nature. And you start with a strong hypothesis of this is the message I want to send, and this is the target audience I want to go after. And you do that completely manual until you start seeing some results, like you're getting positive responses or getting meetings in the door, then automate one piece of it. So like automate the list building, then automate the targeting, then automate, maybe the follow-up emails, and then figure out how to automate the initial emails. And you do it step by step, because if you start the opposite direction where you start with volume, um, you're like lots of times that initial hypothesis isn't going to work. And so you just burn through a bunch of accounts and you're stuck with this volume, and it's hard to kind of scale back. So I like to scale up. And then it also goes back to what we said in the beginning, which is keeping track of like your booking rate, which is like how often am I actually getting meetings? Because if it's extremely low, then you don't have quality, you just have super high volume. But if you have a good booking rate and you're slowly increasing your volume and keeping that booking rate in terms of how often you're booking meetings, for the amount of prospects you're reaching out to, then you can just keep scaling up the volume as high as you want, as long as that, again, that, meetings booked rate is within the right area.
Speaking of which, how do you quantify metrics for outbound?
Yeah. How do I quantify metric? Like what metrics do I track? the
Yeah.
most, or so there's a lot. Like when it comes to email, so email, I'm particularly tracking open reply rates and then booking rates. When it comes to cold call, it's connect rates and then positive connect rates. So what percentage of the time are you actually converting that conversation to a meeting? I don't really track much on LinkedIn just because it's really hard to track like connect acceptance rates and messages on LinkedIn. So I'm not necessarily tracking that. Those are the key like outbound metrics in terms of prospecting. Additionally, I'm tracking context added to sequence per week. You know, you have to break things down in terms of like what is your monthly meetings goal, and then how many leads do you need to add to sequence to hit that number. And so that's a big metric that we're tracking on a regular basis. And then on the bottom funnel of side of things, we're tracking show rates, um, meetings moved from showed to qualified, so qualified rate, and then obviously close rate. But that's what, probably 8 metrics that I'm tracking pretty closely. And I have like a spreadsheet where I keep track of all these metrics and benchmarks. So if anybody's interested in that spreadsheet, hit me up on LinkedIn, and I'll send it to you. But it's basically like all the key metrics I track and then the key benchmarks that I try to hit for each one, depending on like the industry, company size, etc.
How do I know it's time to scale a channel? What am I looking for?
I mean, it comes back to what we said before. So if you're trying to scale, like I've used email a lot and talked about that booking rate. Phone is another example. If when it's time to scale a channel is when you've done things manually enough and seen enough results, and you're in that rate that you want to be in. So I think like a good positive meeting rate on the phone is like anywhere from 10 to 20%. So that means if you connect with 10 people, you book 1 or 2 meetings. If you're in that range and the rest of your sales team is in that range as well, scale the channel, right? Like hire more cold callers, invest in a power dialer to increase the volume, and then keep a closer eye on that conversion rate. And so that's the biggest thing. It kind of comes back to what we've been saying is like, what is that conversion rate once you're actually in touch with the prospect?
Next one is a long one. I use outreach. When I email myself, it always lands in the primary, DMARC, etc. Checks are always fine. A lot of emails get opened immediately, so my open rate looks good, but I'm not convinced people are seeing them. The content is usually relevant and personalized enough to spark a reply, always send individually and adhering to all the guidelines we always hear. Is it just a case of sophisticated email filters?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of context missing from this, and it's not the person's fault because it's like you can only put so much context into a piece of text for a question. But my assumption is that it sounds like this person's done their research on standard deliverability best practices, so I'm sure they're doing that. One thing I will say with outreach and sales often a lot of the big sequencing softwares is that if you're getting an immediate open, 9 times out of 10, that's a bot open, and so the open rates aren't actually as high as you think they are, unfortunately. The second thing is I would be curious to know what industry they're going after. There's particular industries where you're literally just never going to get higher than the 30% open rate. It also depends on the persona you're selling to and the size of the company. Like if you're reaching to enterprise accounts and trying to hit VPC level in like healthcare, for example, like good luck getting 20% opens. It's simply going to be very difficult. And so your expectation for email just has to be much lower. You have to rely on different channels, whether that be events, referrals, cold calling, LinkedIn, etc. But you just simply aren't going to see the same results with email. And it's not it's kind of something you have to accept and understand that email is going to be a much slower channel for you. The only other thing I would recommend this person do is that Outreach does have a thing called custom domain tracking, which not a lot of people enable or necessarily know about. And what that does is it white labels Outreach from the pixel tracking, which can help you land in more inboxes. And so if you are listening to this or you get this recording, whoever asked that, go reach out to your outreach support rep and ask if you can enable custom domain tracking.
How do you maintain urgency for deals longer than 6 months?
Like where the sales cycle is like 6 months, how do you maintain urgency? Um, I guess it's a tough question. So I guess if the question is like, if a sales cycle is like 6 months, how do I maintain urgency? I mean, the biggest thing for me is like, you have to know a few key things. You have to have a critical reason why they're actually meeting with you, and you have to be like airtight on with your champion in terms of uh, like why are we even speaking in the first place? What is the problem you're trying to solve? And have you actually identified that they've tried solving this problem in a bunch of other ways? So, like for example, a question I like to ask is like, how have you tried solving this problem before meeting with me? And if they say like, yeah, we've tried X, Y, and Z, and now we're here with you, then you have good urgency, right? You can keep coming back to that. It's like, hey, if this deal is stalling, you can continue to bring that up. Like, hey, you mentioned to me before that you've tried all these other things. It sounds like this is the last option, and you can kind of continue to keep your foot on the gas in terms of the urgency sense. If they haven't tried these other things, that means you have to do more discovery, and your deal's at a little bit more of a risk because you aren't their last option. They haven't explored all possibilities, and that could be what's stalling your deal is they're exploring other possibilities. And so you need to have a really good reason as to why your product or your service, your solution is the best fit for solving that problem. And you need to discover a little bit more about what are these potential areas that they're potentially looking into, and how does your solution kind of compare to that as well. So that's the biggest thing for me is just again asking how have you tried solving this problem before and being really airtight on why they're speaking with you to solve that problem.
Super helpful. The next question is, as a full cycle AE, I'm always looking for ways to enhance my prospecting strategies. In your experience, what key adjustments or innovations do you believe will be crucial for full cycle AEs in the coming years, considering the evolving landscapes of AI and technology in the sales industry?
Yeah, so I firmly believe that the sales reps who are going to be the most successful in this new AI era are the ones who master AI for targeting and specifically like pre-intent signals. So we all talk about like the idea of intent data, Sixth Sense, demand-based Bombaro. Those are great tools, but there are pre-intent signals that are going to make you much more successful. So looking for specific trigger events and pieces of information and research about a company that can allow you to personalize your message and come up with a hypothesis around what problems they might be having. And that's what's really interesting about AI tools is that there's a lot of them out there that are allowing you to research and get access to data that previously wasn't available or extremely hard to find. Much better like technographic data, much better information about what's going on in the company, just a lot more data in general. So for a full cycle rep, if they can learn how to, you don't have as much time to prospect. So if you can learn how to target the absolute 1% best of accounts in your market, you're going to be much more efficient because you're starting with a better foundation. Another tip I'll give as well that I did as a seller and had my team do, particularly at my last company, was that anytime we have a new discovery call, at some point in the call, we'll look at what their last company they worked at was and just bring it up and say, hey, I saw you used to work at so and so company. Um, do you think this problem might be relevant there? If so, would you recommend I reach out to anyone in particular? It's a very easy way to get some easy referrals because people are changing jobs all the time. And so that's another thing to do to be a little bit more efficient if you're a full cycle rep.
I'm just curious, what's in your tech stack and how did it change compared to the last year? What's
Well,
new?
it's weird now because I work for myself and I essentially consult with a bunch of different companies, and I'm investing in different tech stacks depending on the companies. I've also been like trying every tool under the sun. My favorite tool by far is Clay, which has been getting a lot of popularity over the last year. Because the interesting thing about Clay, by the way, I'm not like sponsored by them or anything like that. It's just genuinely a really good tool. The interesting thing about Clay is that it combines like 50 plus data providers into one platform. So there's that you buy credits with Clay, and then you say, hey, I want to find this person's email address, for example, and then it'll cross-check the other 50 data providers to give you the best possible email address. So it's extremely powerful, and you can find a ton of information. And so that's the main tool I use for data research, account targeting, all of that. For email, I use SmartLead. It's been probably my favorite tool for just doing cold email. Nooks I've been using for cold calling, but all of them are really good. Orem, Connect and Sell, etc. I think powered hours are kind of a necessity right now, just because connect rates are extremely low. Like they were like 15% for me 3 years ago, and now they're like 5% across the board. So big one is Clay, but yeah, there's a bunch of tools I'm using. Those are the main ones.
Speaking of cold calling, uh, question from the audience, call intro that work for you.
I get a lot of hate for this. My favorite cold call opener is just, hey, this is Jed calling from so and so. I sent you an email about whatever it was about, whatever like research I did on them. Does the name sound familiar? I like it because it's just comfortable to me. And I think what's more important when it comes to cold call openers is what's comfortable to you. I see it happen so many times where like an SDR will try a cold call opener for a month or a week, and they change it, and then they change it again, and they change it again, and like you're just going back to ground, like to back to level one, right? Like you can't make any progress because it's all about being comfortable. your opener is less about what you say. It's just about this person is skeptical of you. You call them out of the blue. You need to earn their trust. And the best way you can do that is through your tone. And so that's why I picked that opener, because it just makes me feel comfortable and gets me through the door more.
How do you shorten enterprise sales cycles?
So I'm gonna be honest, I don't have much experience selling into enterprise. So I really wouldn't have the advice I give you is not going to be as good as uh, many other people out there. I've hardly sold any enterprise deals and done that. Um, you know what, honestly, Julie, I don't even want to give any feedback on that one because it's just not
Let's
a
just
relevant
skip.
question to me. Yeah.
Thanks for the honesty.
Yeah.
Uh, any tips for getting more meetings with prospects?
A lot of tips. That's most of what I talk about. Uh, I'm trying to think what would be the best piece of advice here because there's a lot of like cool, like low hanging fruit ideas you can do. I think my best tip, and I always come back to this, is something I've been doing for years, is that if you're an SDR or an AE, once a month, you should be looking at all the deals you closed, all the meetings you booked, putting them into a spreadsheet, and then researching all of those companies and finding what are the similarities, what are the patterns, what are the reasons they were interested, how big is the company, what industry, what persona did I book them with, what sort of events were happening in the company. And if you do this on a monthly basis, over like 6 months, you'll have a big list of all these different signals and patterns and similarities. And what that'll allow you to do is A, target companies much more effectively because you have it's essentially like following the 80-20 rule. You just continue to prospect what you know is already working. And then the second thing it'll help you do is just speak like have better messaging on the phone and over email when you're reaching out to these companies because you just have a better understanding of why you're constantly being introspective on why these companies that you have booked are interested, and that allows you to speak better to the future companies that you're trying to book when prospecting. So that's just an exercise I recommend people do on a monthly basis because it'll always help you get more meetings.
Next question. Assuming all outbound is personalized, what sample size are you using to determine whether something should change? What metrics are you analyzing and how do you know what to replace it with? I'm emailing and using LinkedIn with voice message and personalized videos as volume bumps. Thoughts on Lavender 75 word rule? Anytime you'd break it. It's a lot.
Okay, a lot of questions. The first question is what sample size do I use? When it comes to email, I try to get like I mean, sometimes people can't do this, but I try to get at least 500 sends before changing something. Sometimes you know right away after a couple of hundred sends, but like 500 is my golden rule when I'm A/B testing. Additionally, A/B testing is something that I think is highly misunderstood. There are a lot of things you can A/B test when it comes to. We'll just stick with email, for example. A lot of things you can A/B test. You can A/B test the subject line, the opening line, your value proposition, the problems you're talking about, your call to action, what you put in the PS, who you target, when you send the email, etc. I can make a list of like 20 things. So what you need to do is list out all of the things that you could possibly A/B test, and then force rank them in terms of what's potentially going to have the highest impact. A call to action is going to have a very low impact compared to A/B testing your subject line because by the time they get to a call to action, they've already decided if they're going to respond or not. And so rank these out, start with the highest one, start A/B testing the subject line until you get an open rate that feels good to you. Then A/B test the next thing and only do it one thing at a time. So that's how I think about A/B testing. I think I may have missed another question in there. I know the lavender one. What do I
Yep.
think about Lavender's rule of 75 words? I think Lavender is a great tool, especially if you don't have experience writing cold emails. Uh, Listen, like they have data on millions of emails that says 75 word emails work great. So who am I to say that that data is wrong? What I will say is that data spreads across a lot of different industries, ICPs, and companies. And personally, what I've seen is that long emails actually work really well. Like long emails, ugly emails. What's more important than the length of your email, and this is where I think people get hung up, is they think like, oh, if I write an email that's under 75 words, I'm going to get a response or I'm going to have a better response. Like the caveat there is that it actually has to be a good email that's still relevant. And so I will write very long emails, like 6, 7 sentences sometimes, because I know my audience and I know, um, like for example, I sell to like small businesses. I have a client that does small sells to smaller, like maybe blue collar businesses, for example. They don't care about a short email. If we write a long email and put a lot of information in there that's relevant and we write clearly, they're still going to respond. And so what I would say to this person is focus a little bit more on the relevance of your email, speaking in their language, and less about like, oh, my subject line has to be this long or my email has to be this long, etc.
What's your system for like, I don't know, whenever you're consulting people or you're changing industries, what's your system or process for just actually getting to know your ICP?
Yes. So the first thing I want to do if I like for example, if I'm working with a new company is I have like a form of like all the possible questions I could want to know. And I ask as many people as possible to fill out that form. And maybe it's a little bit annoying, but it saves me time of having to go back to ask them. So I get all that information. Next thing I do is I listen to as many demo recordings as I can. Third thing I do is I always ask for customer data. So I have a process, and if you work at a company, hopefully that customer data is available to you. I know sometimes it's sensitive information; it's not easy, but I will get the customer data. I will put it into. I actually use Clay for this. I upload it into Clay, and then I have Clay basically manipulate the data to where it standardizes all the industries, company sizes, headcount, et cetera. And so what that does for me is it allows me to see like a holistic view of where their customers are at and what type of again industries, locations, etc., so that I can really get like real data on who their actual ICP is because your ICP is who's paying you, right? Like you can talk to people at a company and they'll tell you what their ICP is, but oftentimes it's a little bit anecdotal. And so looking at customer data is like one of the best ways I can do that. And then in terms of understanding the ICP, I try to as much as possible actually interview these customers. Sometimes you can't do that, so demo recordings are as good as possible. And then I do some things in ChatGPT, but that only is going to help you so much. But it's really just looking at customer data, talking to the people that have worked there for a while, and listening to as many customer calls as possible.
Super helpful. We have 2 minutes. Just make sure to address a couple of questions, the short ones.
Yeah,
Here's
I'll go
one.
quick.
What are your favorite discovery questions to start the meeting before a demo?
I don't like when it comes to outbound. My favorite discovery question or opening question was like, "Hey, can you tell me a little bit more about what piqued your curiosity to take this meeting?" Outbound demos are much different from inbound demos. Sorry, I know I said I was going to answer it short. My favorite question is just what piqued your curiosity to take this meeting. Very open ended. They give you all the information you need to really start off a discovery call on the right foot.
What are the top 3, 5 things you have learned from launching your business? What would you do differently if you started over?
Um, be much be much more in tune with like my values and the type of companies like that I want to work at and work with. And like not saying yes to every single opportunity, and trying to scatter to yeah, like not saying yes to every opportunity, not just like folding to your clients because you're starting a new business and you're not like in tune with your value. That's a big thing I learned. Take payments up front before working with somebody. That's a big one. Um, and also create systems like you'll find yourself, at least I have when I'm consulting with people, like I find myself doing the same things over and over again. And so that onboarding form I talked about to learn people's ICP is something that saved me a lot of time. So those are like probably the two or the three biggest things.
I'm an
I'm still
intern.
figuring it out though.
I'm an intern. What's the best way to secure a full-time job?
Ask the person whose team you want to get promoted to. What do I need to do to be full time here? Like when I was an intern at PandaDoc when I started, and I asked the SDR manager like, "Hey man, what do I got to do to make your team?" And he said, "Make more calls than everybody for 3 months." And so that's what I did. I just made more calls than everybody. And it's like closed mouths don't get fed. I know it's not like any wild advice that you haven't heard before, but start a relationship with the person whose team, the person who's going to be able to promote you, and just simply ask them. Like if I'm a manager and somebody asks me, how can I provide more value to be on your team? I'm going to give it to them straight up and just follow those rules. You know what I mean? So that's the biggest thing.
We're on the top of the hour. Jed, as usual, super practical, super helpful. Appreciate you a ton. We have a bunch of unanswered questions and comments, and generally people rave. I'll just shoot it all over to you after the
Yeah.
session. And yeah, feel free to ping Jed, and Jed is available for one-on-one sessions on HSC. So your wallet will thank you.
Totally. Appreciate it. Thanks, Julia. This is great. Yeah, if you send those over to me, I can also like record a video just answering each question. So let me know.
Super cool. Yep. Thanks so much.
See you later.
See you.